To what extent would you say that it's important to get that matter resolved in order to focus on what many people would see as the greater threat, China's ambitions understood and not understood, certain and uncertain?
I think it's vital, and that's why for 3 years Heritage has been opposed to the form of aid that our Congress has authorized to Ukraine. We argued early, well before Russia invaded Ukraine, that there should have been preemptive military aid sent to deter him from invading Ukraine. In fact, as we learned, the greatest deterrence to invading Ukraine is Donald Trump. And so having Joe Biden in office, of course, meant that that wasn't going to happen. But all we've done is send $260 billion of aid that has prolonged a war that's unwinnable. I'm not happy that it's unwinnable, to be clear. But in the United States, we're in a situation because of our debt crisis where we have to be very sober about what we can afford and not afford. The second reason we have argued against that is because we believe from America's interest, while Ukraine is important, that far more important to us is China. Recognizing that threat, which my great friend Elbridge Colby, who will be serving in the administration, has been an advocate for, I think is the kind of foreign policy that our friends in Australia and around the world can expect more of from the United States, which is to say, not a retreat from the world stage, but doing a better job of prioritizing what's in our interests, using our ears, listening to our allies about where we can work in concert against shared allies, shared enemies. Russia's obviously one of those, but Russia is not number one on our list of concerns.
I suppose in some ways I've had a concern that if you send the message to Beijing that if you can grab a bit of territory and there'll be a bit of a fuss from the West, but they're exhausted and they won't last long, whereas we Russians, we know how to wait for centuries. If that plays out the wrong way in Beijing, you just got to spend a bit of time.
You and I both know Chinese culture, and in fact, I think the conclusion has been the opposite, which is that the situation in Ukraine has been many European nations clamoring for the United States to do something that they themselves are unwilling to do. And the greatest sign of weakness the United States could have shown, it has, which is to send military aid to a conflict that probably neither side could win really clearly, as Russia's very weak. The Chinese understand how weak Russia is, socially, economically, in spite of its oil and gas production, and even militarily. The greatest sign of strength the United States can show is understanding its priorities, which is that China is the number one adversary. In fact, we argue at Heritage, the greatest adversary in the history of the United States. And we have worked at Heritage to make sure that that's a bipartisan consensus, because one of the things that Xi in particular understands, the Chinese have understood for centuries, is that when you have in a democracy or a republic or a constitutional monarchy, a rather unified political movement against them, that it's probably time not to be so expansionist. I think that's the lesson. I also think that that's going to be one of the great legacies of this Trump term.